Hey everybody, it's Brian Hunt, and welcome to another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. And in this show, we talk about risk in its all various facets, obviously with a heavy emphasis on construction and real estate. But construction and real estate are segments of the over broader economy. And like all sectors of the economy, I don't care what industry you do, whether it be manufacturing, leisure, hospitality, data centers, everybody needs electricity. Nothing can be done without electricity and power and energy. And it's sort of the bloodline, the juice, for lack of a better term, that supports all sectors of the economy. And if you live in Texas, especially maybe down in Houston a couple weeks ago, or you live in Dallas, as like I do a couple weeks ago, we lost power. And sectors of Dallas lost power for 5 days. I fortunately lost it for 2. And to that point, I was only able to sort of mitigate some of that exposure because I had a small portable jackery that, again, stored power. That allowed me to turn on lights and run a gas, tea kettle or a microwave when I needed to, a fan. And it, like all things is, if without power, electricity, energy, everything sort of shuts down. And to that point, it's a factor that impacts everything. And so what I want to do is spend some time talking about energy, how it is, how it got to where it was, and where it's going to be, and all the different factors that come into play. And with that point, I'm very excited to have my guest on, who's an expert in the world of energy and how it in transition and all the factors that come into it, whether it be finance and geopolitics. And at this time, I'm very happy to introduce Jennifer Warren. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Oh, my pleasure. No, I've just so you know, Jennifer and I met not too long ago at a recent function here that was sort of focused on Tom Shakar, actually, who was a former guest on this show. We talked about his book, and you and I were chatting. Got to learn more about your background. And I thought it'd be a fantastic opportunity to have on the show because, as I made allude to in the opening, it's kind of hard to do anything without some basic energy or power support. So thanks for coming on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Jennifer, you're about my age. And so if I ask this question of most of my people, I guess you're about my age, so you probably know this reference. If we're playing the game, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego today? Where in the world is Jennifer Warren today?
Well, how I got here and where I am. So I have a consultancy called Concept Elemental that I started in 1996.
Okay.
And that kind of sprung out of me wanting to sort of go on my own and expand into global horizons. I had been working in 92 in the insurance industry, interestingly enough. And so I'm kind of familiar with the, risk lens, but it was more health and financial services products and that sort of thing. But I really pivoted in 96 and I wanted to go on my own, and I took on some global clients doing some of the early work to do with joint ventures in China and India, some of the early research with multinationals in the late 90s. And I was still keeping my hands in financial services. But then in like the early 2000s, I really started to sort of pivot more into energy and resources. And I had a client, Cox School of Business. I helped develop the first knowledge site there.
Okay.
And I've continued to be an editor. So I've always had this like research background, and then trying to apply it to the real world context. And then I, chronicled all the shale booms when they started here in North Texas, because this was ground zero.
Mm-hmm.
And then the consultancies evolved. It's, resource advisory, in communications and marketing and strategy and, sustainability advising, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, obviously, Jennifer, you have a very interesting background. I kind of want to take it back for a second because look, just even from your education and knowing your background. So you went to the University of Denver. Mm-hmm. What did you study there?
So at DU, I did a double major in finance and marketing. Okay. So I've always never been able to pick one thing. I'm always having to do two. And, the marketing was sort of like the creative aspect, and finance was, the hard numbers, the quantitative side of life. And I think that's served me pretty well. But I got really interested in global affairs there, and I studied Russian. Oh. And it was at a time of the Cold War, and China was just coming on board on the world stage, but the Cold War was, in full swing, and that's actually what led me to going to London School of Economics afterwards to do my master's and living in London for some number of years and working over there.
Amazing.
And then I came back to the States in 92 and joined my family firm, which was in insurance and all this.
Yeah.
So
Well, I know firsthand University of Denver is very well known for its international affairs. I mean, Condoleezza Rice came out of there. And I've got a niece that's graduating there, but she's studying visual arts, so it's not international affairs. but tell us, I mean, I know being in London is obviously a different experience than being in Dallas or New York. What was your experience in London? How did that sort of form where you got to be today?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the time, what was really interesting was, I did this degree, it was a master's in European studies, and it was multidisciplinary, so it was history, politics, economics, and institutions of Europe. As Europe was coming out of, the wartime, right? It was integrating. And at that time, it was still called the EC. And then it became the EU and expanded. And so those are like the early days of that study. And so all the students around me were very much steeped in World War II, right? And here I was, this American with this business background. So it was a little bit like, I was like a duck out of water,
to say the least.
But then I just sort of, picked up what I needed there. And I studied fine art for a year or two at one point and was antique dealing.
Oh, wow.
Out of school at one point. But, so just the entrepreneurial thing, right? That's kind of like in the blood. And, but no, when I came back to the States, it was really hard because, I was really used to this very international environment. And that's where I, met Dallas Committee on Foreign Relations and got around a group that was really into global affairs, and I ran that organization at one point for a while, and so that's where the geopolitics comes into play, and energy is a story of all that,
Oh, absolutely.
as well.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. So before we get into that, everybody, if you're sitting there watching the show live, if you look at your screen to the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a picture of me in a circle, and the next two is an oval, where it says add a comment. Is if you have a question for Jennifer during the course of our conversation, please go ahead and submit that. And as long as you keep it clean, I'll bring it to Jennifer's attention. We'll see what she has to say about it. So Jennifer, you and I let's talk about energy. And obviously this could have set the stage. I mean, I remember growing up 70s and the long lines for gas, OPEC embargo. We were kind of talking yesterday as far as, you can trace the focus went from, when Churchill decided to go from powering the Navy vessels from coal to oil, everything sort of focused on the Middle East. And that was definitely the case of the 70s, and obviously being dragged in with the Iranian hostage crisis and all of that. But then all of a sudden, somehow, some way, some guy, I can't remember his name, but I read the story, came up with this idea to try to come out and get oil from, using shale, the shale technology. Can you maybe, let's set the stage, talk about how energy was in this country before shale, and then how has it changed, and how did shale change the whole dynamic?
Well, what I can start with, because my era in energy, I'm the beginning of shale.
Okay.
That's really where, before we were importing oil, right? And we were a big importer. We were reliant on OPEC. So we were at risk in that sense. But then what happened in 2005, in the early 2000s, that is when the advent of shale gas really started. And it started in North Texas. And I know there's a certain individual that gets a lot of the credit for it. And he absolutely was one who helped commercialize shale gas. But that story started before that. And that was something I wrote about in 2022 in DCEO is in the 80s, in fact, there was a man named George Yates from New Mexico, a fourth generation oil and gas man, whose family was they did the first, public well in New Mexico in 1920, 100 years ago. Yeah. Anyway, he was in the 80s working on the tech and trying to, extract, and do horizontal drilling and all that back then. So that was really an evolution. It took a long time for them to crack that code, and it got cracked in commercial here in North Texas. And I wrote one of the first shale gas breakout stories here in 2008. I'd been working on it before, and in fact, interviewing in 2005 Scott Sheffield of Pioneer, because that's when it was really starting. And then shale oil, what happened was, so shale gas molecules are smaller than oil molecules. So they cracked the code doing it with shale gas where it was, economic. But then shale oil, so then they started experimenting, in the Eagleford and in the Barnett, and then came the Permian. And in 2013, that's when it got big.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote sort of that breakout story for DCO it came out in early 2014, but I had already been working on it for like 6 months before. And the reason I heard about the shale oil boom was because I was driving through the Permian on a 13-hour road trip through Texas. And so I saw it firsthand, what was going on. I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And that's when I talked to my editor. I'm like, this is the story, And so in fact, I kind of back into a lot of this through firsthand experience, not just looking at the numbers and the trends, but really talking to the people on the ground doing the work, and keeping that link tight, so I have a good understanding. But now, we're like a top producer in the world.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And this is a good thing, because if it were not for like the Permian that supplies like 6% of global supply right now, we would be reliant on OPEC and Russia, and that would be a different world. So for all the guff that the fossil fuel industry gets, well, in some respects, they're saving our bacon geopolitically.
No, that's true. And I get curious. Let's rewind the clock back when you're covering the shale industry, and that was infancy stages. Did even then they have an idea how good this was going to be, or how bountiful this was going to be, or was it still kind of like, well, maybe it's not going to happen, we don't know?
No. I mean, it's really basin by basin, right?
Yeah.
Like it started in the Barnett, is where it really got proved out and commercialized. And that, again, you can refer to that story from 2008. You can just Google my name, DCEO, shale gas, you'll pop it up, or it's on my site. A lot of my material is on my site. Everything is. And, really, and what happened though, was we had the financial crisis, 2008, 2010, and that took the wind out of the sails of shale gas, right? But then they were still experimenting because, they're oil and gas, they have to keep the lights on, they have to keep, the gas flowing, all that. But they were experimenting with shale oil, in the Eagleford, EOG was, Pioneer was, in the Permian, Concho was, which got gobbled up by somebody. I can't even remember. There was like a big wave of consolidation that happened after all that. And then there's another wave happening now. But in 2013, when the Permian hit, that's when it got real. And then as a result of that, 2015, we were allowed to export crude for the first time. 2016, we started exporting LNG for the first time. So that is real. And it's a lot of capital expenditure. And all our pipeline systems had to be reworked to connect all these basins, because we were importing. So we were like, taking in, crude and natural gas from the Gulf, and then sending it up north and sending it, different directions. Those pipelines had to be reworked. And there's a story I wrote in 2023 about that, that way working.
Yeah, I remember, Jennifer, because at that about 2003, 2005, I was working, I was studying for my grad certificate in international affairs from the Bush School. And I remember one of the class I took was about energy, the dynamics of energy. And at that time, 2003, there was talk and people out there, doing, pro formas to do investments to build LNG terminals on the coast to import liquefied natural gas, because that was the thing, when we need to import it.
Right.
But shale completely turned that on a dime. So now we're to the point actually exporting liquefied natural gas, which is amazing.
Yes, no, absolutely. And in fact, the firm Energy Transfer, they took an import facility in Lake Charles and have converted it to an export facility. Wow. And they're one of the firms that's being held up by the Biden pause. I mean, it's infrastructure sitting there practically ready to go. And they've done all this work, and so that's not helpful, is what it is.
Yeah. So let's kind of to a point, let's pivot and talk about, like, as far as where we stand now. Obviously, we are a major exporter of oil and natural gas. And to your point, with the Ukraine war, invasion by Russia, disruption occurred, we were very fortunate in that aspect, and now we're even able to export to EU. And so we were fortunate for the shale in the sense it has reduced our risk, our dependency on third parties, and now we're gonna be a little more self-sufficient and maybe even like not necessarily worry, or I would even say during this prime, we were even thinking about, how can we extract ourselves or not be so bogged down in the Middle East, but obviously that's kind of changing right now. So it's changed us to be an energy producer.
Yes.
And as a result, the power and influence that comes with it and self-sufficiency. But how do you look at the current state of the global market with respect to energy, taking into account, coal, natural gas, where we stand this, and then also this push or hope to become, green energy?
Yeah.
How would you sort of evaluate the current situation at my macro level?
How would I characterize it? Yes. So you have to look at the drivers of demand for one, and then the sources of supply for two, right?
Okay.
The big drivers of demand for oil, it's a developing world story. We consume what we consume in the United States and Europe as well. And Europe's trying to diversify more. They've gone through a number of iterations with their green policies, which started in the late, 2010s. And because of the Russia invasion, that has turned some of their green policies upside down, because what that really revealed was that energy security trumps greenness. That if you can't power your economy, if you can't keep the lights on, you can't be freezing in the cold.
Yep.
You can't have your population freezing in the cold. You can't have your population bearing the cost of decarbonization in its entirety as you would like it to, though you think it's the best thing, and it may be. So there's natural limits, in terms of capital and resources, and what resources you have access to. And that's a big driver for everything, just those fundamentals. So you look at China, okay, their strengths right now, they've sunk a ton of money into their green policies, wind, solar, EVs, all of it, power. But they're also a large importer of oil and gas, and they're going to keep doing that. But they want to grow their economy. They have ambitions, but they also dominate all that mineral supply chain, right? And that's what we're trying to change through this new legislation called the IRA that happened in 2021, 22. But it's also creating a lot of distorted incentives, and there's going to be a lot of money wasted. There will be some breakthroughs, but it's also picking winners. And, and the other way I'd characterize it is, even in the Middle East, if you look at Saudi Arabia's behavior, they want to diversify their economy. And that's been a stated goal for, years.
Sure.
And that's, it's smart, because look at the world, look at the Mag 7, look at the stock market, look at Nvidia, all of it. If you want to have a modernized, developed world economy, you have to do certain things. You also have to you have to clean up. Absolutely. We can't continue to just, send everything in the atmosphere and think nothing's going to happen, So there's this balance that has to happen, over time. And I think that's where it's at. And I think the fossil fuel versus renewables debate isn't even the real debate,
Yeah. And I want to bring that into, actually, we don't have a question, but at least I want to bring a comment from Jordan Ray saying this is a key Texas oil and gas history lesson over here. So Jordan, thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. Again, if everybody's out there, you have a question for Jennifer, please go ahead and type in the bottom right-hand corner, just like this, and I will bring it to Jennifer's attention. So thank you.
Yeah, one thing I'll say too about Texas is, we have it happening in energy. It's not just oil and gas. There is a lot of innovation that is happening here. With Austin, Houston, Dallas, the Triangle area. We're a hotbed of innovation and trying new things. So I think that's what's attracting so many firms here as well. And, so it's one of the best things we have going for us. And it's really, the foundation is an entrepreneurial spirit, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was born here, and my dad was a super entrepreneur. And so I get it, I get what that mentality is about,
Yeah, and Jennifer, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to lead to, Texas is sort of an odd situation in a sense, because everybody thinks about oil, natural gas, we're producers, and we need, Dallas and all that kind of stuff. And there's a big presence in Houston. Obviously, it's the energy capital of the world. But we're also probably one of the highest producers, and we also have the perfect mix for both solar and wind, especially
Yes.
with the ability in West Texas.
Right.
And that's kind of a strange juxtaposition because we can do that and have a diversified base,
Yeah.
as opposed to, like, say, New England, where I spent high school.
Yeah.
It'd be great to have solar, but the sun doesn't shine enough times during the course of the year to generate enough
Right.
solar or wind. Maybe put on it's you can't just do one, because of the dynamics of wind and sun, it's not necessarily enough to keep a grid stable.
Yeah, the intermittency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Texas, and I have some materials on my YouTube channels where I go into a lot of detail about ERCOT. We have our own grid, which what's interesting about that is it makes us the perfect study of an energy transition. On a perfect temperate day of December 12, and I think I have this on a video even, we were like firing off like 50% renewables, and then natural gas and nuclear and coal were picking up the rest. The solar eclipse, of course, solar went down during the, when the sun went away. Natural gas was 60%. Actually, it kicked up to 60%.
Wow.
We don't have a lot of battery storage on our grid. That's something is probably going to change a little bit in the future. But what's happening in Texas too is there's such a, we're short gigawatts for one, for all this economic activity that we have and all the economic activity that is expected. And you can't make that cut with just solar and wind. And for lots of reasons, siting reasons, grid interconnection queues. I just heard from an ERCOT expert yesterday, and he's like, it's like 14 to 24 months of an interconnection queue for solar that's in the queue to get on board, and not all of it's going to make the cut. That wants to get in the queue. So there's limits to how much solar you can actually add for all kinds of reasons to do with the grid, land use, all this stuff. So that's why I think a lot of the big tech and everything, they're really getting interested in nuclear, as is, the government, and everyone's kind of woken up and gone, oh, that's clean baseload. How do we do that? And,
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually, I'll circle back. The thought of nuclear, because it's obviously, it was popular in the 70s and 80s. It was very expensive. And then we got maybe 3 Mile Island. We got scared. We didn't do it as much. And more money was going towards oil and natural gas. And then you saw, like, say, what happened, every Fukushima in Japan, the flooding, and that people got scared. So, like, that, the Green Party in Germany said, well, we got to shut down our nuclear reactors. It's dangerous. But then now, with the invasion of Ukraine, they're probably wishing they had those nuclear reactors back up and running, because there've been a lot of energy.
Definitely.
But also to the point, and I've learned about this, and I know it's kind of weird, but now we're getting nuclear power plants that are smaller, that can, like, say, run just a data center. I think, like, even Microsoft had bought a facility that has just a self-contained nuclear reactor, which I still don't get my hand around, that can power a data center. Do you know enough of that? But talk about that, because that just seems mind-boggling.
Yeah, very generally, because I haven't done deep research on the small-scale nuclear modules, or what you're talking about. And there is a lot going into that. There's a firm called NuScale that does that. These things are in the works. They're not all ready for prime time just yet. There are other companies trying to crack the codes in different ways with nuclear. And I think all that demand for that innovation is going to help push things that way. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it can really bode well for efficiency. That's the other thing is, fossil fuels, oil and gas make up a huge part of our mix. And we have all these legacy systems, legacy pipelines, capital intensive, not going away anytime soon. We rely on these things. Everything else is additional. It's additional because we need it, and we will need it, right? So we're going to need it all until there's breakthroughs.
Cold fusion, or whatever.
Exactly. We're Space Odyssey 2100, and I'll be dead. But that's what we're working towards, right? I'm in there with that. But I think there's just a lot of solutions that people are, looking at getting really creative with what we need. And I think the pandemic in a way kind of shucked some of this loose, just, shook that tree, of, oh, wow, what can we do? And so I think there's a really heightened sense of creativity and energy. And I think oil and gas is right in there too. I mean, they have deep pockets. They're investing in decarbonization as well, whether it's CCS or, hydrogen and there's all these things. And I know that policy incentivizes it. And there's also a lot of, what I would just say is misuse of incentives as well. And I don't like that at all, because I feel like we waste time when we sit there and drive ourselves towards using tax credits exclusively and make that the goal, for making money, and not, what the end product is and the long-term viability, right, as a firm. Then I think that, the economist in me, just goes, oh my God, seeing some of these policy, distortions and things like that. But
so let's circle back for a second. We talk about Texas and, kind of a microcosm. One of my favorite economists is Peter Zion, and he does these, on his YouTube channel as well. And he really will dig into a topic. And he did a topic recently, which I posted on LinkedIn, just about how Texas doesn't have enough energy. And I thought that's kind of an interesting point, but then we talk about it. And there's a couple of things he brings that I think he made allusion to. I'd like you to expand on it. Obviously, you have just the states growing rapidly, and people are, just moving here. But then you're starting, with, decoupling from China, de-risking, however you want to describe it. A lot of manufacturing is going to come back to the United States, and a lot of it's probably primed to come back to Texas. And as Peter Zion says, well, it takes a lot of energy to bend steel or run a data center.
Right.
And so whatever you're hoping to plan, you need to be able to increase the capacity of the grid. And then you add onto that climate change, and it's getting a lot hotter around here. And so when it's hotter, you got to run those ACs, and it takes a lot of energy. So just the fact of the demand that's here and coming, the grid as itself is not necessarily sufficient to meet that demand or capacity. And then to your point, these things aren't cheap.
Yeah.
You want to build a substation, it's, we're an LNG gas plant, whatever, you're talking billions, if not, billions upon billions. And investors do want a good rate of return. I invest in the stock market. I like to get a rate of return that beats, inflation. And I'm an S&P 500 index fund. I've got plenty of money sitting probably in oil and natural gas stocks. Are you thinking about where we are now and where especially in Texas in the future, what do you see as the big concerns as far as what needs to be done to meet that demand, or what are the implications if we don't?
Yeah. No, I mean, I know there's a lot of articles that have been flying around about all that. And I wrote a story called Texas $1 Million Miles back in the fall of 2022, actually really looking under the hood of this, and sort of, and doing the field work, not just reading other people's stories or, whatever a think tank said. I mean, I did boots on the ground. I ran around, I talked to experts, I went to conferences. I mean, for the last 2 years, I've done a ton of field work on all this. Yeah. And what I can say is, we're short power for the anticipated growth that's expected, right? But I think at the same time, the limiting factor is energy, right? You can only grow so much as to how much energy is available as well, right? And that's resources. So Mother Earth has a little bit to say about that, right?
True.
And so I think for all the projections, forecast, estimations, guesstimations, and I see them all, I use those charts too, because we're all trying to figure out where's the puck going, but I always work back to what is practical, what is doable, what are people doing, what are firms doing, what's the behavior, who are the incumbents, where's the capital flowing, and so I'm looking at all that, and I think that it's just going to take longer than people think. Yeah. We read the news stories. We think that we're in Greenland, not the country, but, because of how the media, lights onto, the new thing, this means we're like, we're like 50% green or,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. But the reality is it is going to take a while. And, we have these legacy systems. For example, we're consuming about 100 million barrels a day around the globe. This year, it's going to be about 102 or 3. Next year, they're going to add 1 or 2 million barrels. That's still a lot of growth, and that's a lot of capital, and that's needed around the world. Natural gas grows. Natural gas grows more than oil demand because of its use in, power, right?
Yeah.
And it's a big Asia story. A lot of the growth is going to be happening in Asia, and so the thing is, we live in a global market for all these resources,
Sure.
right? And so that also plays into it. And while Texas definitely has a lot of advantages, we also, are constrained by how fast you can really move and how fast capital will move. And it's been slowed down a little bit with interest rates, right?
Well, I was about to point to that. So we talked about where, in your talking to people in the industry, what are their thoughts right now on, because again, investing, there's a cost of capital, whether or not most people don't pay cash. So you're probably get some debt financing that goes involved with this. And I've said, people, rates are high. Well, no, rates are back to being normal before quantitative easing and, the Great Recession.
Right.
So when you're talking to the industry veterans, what are their thoughts right now as far as, should or should I not invest in capital projects?
Well, I think the oil and gas industry is doing a lot of consolidation.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's really what you're seeing.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is, reconfiguring assets, right? Doubling down, fortifying for the future. There's like 234 billion of mergers last year in oil and gas, and that's continuing.
Wow.
So this is where some of the capital is being spent. They're acquiring, they're scaling, they're scaling for the next iteration, if you will. And so I think that's a good thing. So what the interest rates normalizing has brought about is efficiency, right? Capital efficiency, resource efficiency. So I think that bodes well really for the future, because this is really more of how it should be, right? You can't just have go growth. I don't know, what the demand for NVIDIA's Blackwells are going to be, 5 years hence. And, we have all these expectations. And I think, there's a lot of cash sloshing around with big tech, with, deep pockets and all that. But at the end of the day, the rest of the economy, the real economy is the real economy. And I think it can only go so fast. And I think you're seeing those divergences a little bit, and it's actually, there was a book called Scale that kind of gets at this, having to do with, the limits of the natural world versus the expansion of innovation. Those two collide, and that's physics.
Yeah.
It's always down to physics, really.
No. Yeah. And you bring a good point, because this is like, it's one thing to say, hey, we want to be, we want more solar. Okay, great. But what's the second, third level ramifications of doing that, or what has to be done in order to do that?
Right.
And like you and I were chatting, like most recent book, Daniel Yergin, talking about the sort of the changing dynamics of the energy markets in the world. And one makes a point of, okay, solar, fantastic. But solar is fantastic, like in Texas. You can generate a lot of Texas or Nevada, or where it's very nice and like sunny in deserts, whatever. But there's not a lot of people living there. So you need to move that energy to other parts of the country. But that requires, because as I understand, physics, in the old way, legacy systems, you put wire on a line, it loses power, it loses potency as the further it goes. So in order to replicate or deal with that, you have to, the new generation of high capacity transition lines, which the Chinese are building in abundance and using and putting a lot of money in installing high capacity transmission lines. But for us to do it, that requires a lot of money. Someone's got to pay for that. And that's the ramifications. And I think that's people don't necessarily understand, is like there is money involved with this in order to get these things done.
Right. No, I mean, back to that story I was talking about $1 million miles, Texas $1 million miles. That was about transmission,
Okay.
which is what you're talking
Yeah.
about. And, you know, I calculated it was roughly $1 million a mile per, you know, adding transmission. Really, it's more like 2 million a mile, and the ratepayer has to pay for that.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of monies like that the Biden administration announced for transmission, but it's minor, you know. But what is happening, and I think this is something that I'm seeing. So I did that. So I attended a lot of Fed conferences in energy and technology disruption in the last couple of years. And I did this video called Hybrid Worlds, Circular Economy and Liquidity. Okay. And basically the hybrid world idea that I was seeing just from boots on the ground is that, you know, you have this centralized world of grids and oil and gas production and legacy systems. And then you have all these decentralized approaches happening. And this has to do with industry. For example, in Texas, I mean, Bitcoin mining, you know, the Bitcoin miners, they move to power, right? And like one Bitcoin miner recommissioned a defunct wind farm in West Texas, you know, brought that back online to use the power. So you see industry moving to power, or industry creating their own power so that they don't have problems of intermittency, you know, so they're not siphoning off the grid. Yeah, and so I think that's these decentralized approaches are, you know, and microgrids, right?
Yeah.
You know, those are ways to, you know, not siphon all the power off the grid and kind of have, you know, off-grid alternatives, you know.
Hey, Jeff, you bring up a good point there, because I remember, I think I heard this in a podcast, I can't remember what it was, but, you know, if you take into account like all the energy that's consumed for the purpose of Bitcoin and mining, that's basically the energy that would be consumed by I think the country of Argentina. From your perspective, I mean, is this benefit? Are we getting a rate of return on this? Is this beneficial? Is it beneficial to let Bitcoin consume so much energy, which is being taken away from other industries? You know, I'm curious what your thought would be on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've wanted to write that story that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And if someone would pay me a lot of money, I'd do it with a ton of research, actually. Yeah. But I know where to go to get it. But but what I would say is, you know, 1/6 of the Bitcoin mining is done in Texas.
Is it?
Yeah, 1/6.
Wow.
China booted all that out, and a lot of it came here. But it's spread around the world. And I can't say what society's return is, but I can say this. Okay, the things that Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin does is it pushes the curve on technology. It pushes the curve on innovation. It pushes things on new approaches where, you know, it's the democratization of, you know, assets and currency and trading and platforms and services. So it's its own world unto itself. So for that innovation, you know, I can't say what the value is, but I can certainly say there are breakthroughs happening. In fact, I know of one Bitcoin miner that, I mean, and some of them do this anyway, you know, they use waste gases. They use resources that would be wasted otherwise, you know, because there's no pipelines going there, or prices are too low for firms to turn a profit. Maybe it saves a firm for another day because they have some Bitcoin miners that can soak up some of this, you know, low price power and give them better prices, that sort of thing. So I think around the margins, they have some benefit for sure. Now, are they I guess the question you're asking is, are they competing with main users on the grid?
Yeah.
And I think that has, you know, in the case that has been an issue, the thought, I don't know if it's the issue, but I do know in Texas, for example, you know, we pay industrial users to turn off when the grid is under, you know, heavy demand, like really, really hot days, and they do it. But what Bitcoin miners can do, they can do it faster. They got it down where they can like shut off in a nanosecond, you know, and that's a powerful thing. That's called demand response initiatives.
Okay.
Those initiatives can trickle down into other things as well. So that's what I mean about, I'm seeing some really interesting bedfellows in innovation to do with, decentralized approaches, blockchain, AI, all of it, the data center equations, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's something I've started looking at. Before it was more like 2 years ago, it was like fossil fuel renewable. Now you add this other layer of advanced economy demand. And the thing that's interesting is all these other countries around the world want advanced economies too. They all they want their economies to grow. They want to be part of the 21st century. India, China, others, many others. This is where the demand is also coming from. And if you're in a globalized energy world, which we are, all these resources are shared. And so you do have to come up with really, I think, hyper efficient ways to use tech, and that's really what I see as the future.
Okay.
And do it clean.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to do it cleaner.
Yeah.
No questions about it.
No,
And I think,
for sure. So everybody out there watching, again, if you have a question for Jennifer, please go ahead and type it in the bottom right-hand corner next to my oval where it says add a comment, and you keep it PG. I'll bring it to Jennifer's attention. So Jennifer, to that point, we're cognizant of time. So put on your crystal ball, your hat, and just look at your crystal ball. Where do you see energy as far as at a macro level, whether either the United States or globally? Where do you think it's going to be in 20 years from now?
20 years from now. Well, I definitely think we're going to have breakthroughs with fission, fusion. One thing I know is, we're going to, and we are supposed to extend our nuclear fleets. Like if their lifespans were 40 years, we're going to be expanding that. So there's that investment. Okay. So there will be the continuation of the nuclear we have. Big nuclear plants, I don't know. Small scale, probably. Fission, fusion, definitely. And oil and gas in there, I think we'll be doing it cleaner. I think it's imperative that we play on the global field in oil and gas markets because we should be leading. We should be showing how to do premium barrels, around the world. And we do it. We're the cleanest producers that, in oil and gas. And I think because we have publicly traded firms with transparency, that really bodes well for a rules-based, world, so that you don't have all the opacity of OPEC and Russia running the world, of energy. So that's one. So I think we need to not shoot ourselves in the foot on energy policy globally, because I think we're one of the best things the world has going for it in terms of energy production and, showing a better way and innovation.
Sure.
So that's what I would say.
All right, Jennifer, we're getting close to the time. We respect for your time. So here's the question I always ask you. So Jennifer, my guest. So Jennifer, when you're not working, what are you doing?
Well, I ice skate.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that for now?
A year and a half.
Interesting.
I take lessons. Yeah, it's really fun. So I started doing that because of the heat. This is my climate change redress in the summer.
Not a bad idea. Yeah.
You can't get out and walk as much. I'm ice skating at a hockey rinks. It's really fun. And then I, travel some, go to indie rock concerts, that sort of thing.
So you say you travel. So what are your favorite? I know you've been in London. You've been around. So what are your favorite spots in the world?
I like the UK a lot. I love Scotland. I love going far north.
Oh wow! I've been to Edinburgh. I've been to far north. I've been to Edinburgh. I love Scotland.
Well, I've been to the Isle of Skye, and I could see Norway. I love cold places too.
Okay.
I've been to Seattle recently, and I'm going back soon. And so Seattle's really
Good
cool.
town.
But I go all over the place for different reasons. So I think every place is interesting. I think every place has its own cool color. I like seeing all sorts of different environments. Whether it's desert, ocean, far north. I think everything has its own unique qualities. In people.
Amen.
So
back earlier, I shot. So I was born here in Irving. So you spent a lot of time here, and I tell people I'm from Irving. Oh, you're the guy, because this place has grown rapidly over the years. So for people who are not familiar too much with Dallas, I'd love to get your quick take. How would you describe the growth that's happened in the past 20, 30 years in Dallas, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I remember when I moved back here from London in '92, I thought, oh God, this is so, and I sort of was like, I just felt like, I didn't really resonate. And then it started growing, and then it became more people from around the country, around the globe started moving in. So it became more cosmopolitan.
Agreed. Yeah.
And then you have all these headquarters coming, and, so I think there's like this super macro level to Dallas. And then you just kind of have your own little micro world that you're navigating around. But I think the growth is interesting, and I think it's continuing. I mean, I just saw the announcement that there might be a Texas stock exchange.
Yeah, I want to dig further into that. That just broke today, so I'm really curious to see what that's all about.
I know, and I thought about that, and I thought, that's cool.
Yeah,
we should have one, and I can think of some listings right away.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be interesting. And but like to your point, I mean, I described, like, I would even say, like, especially from the cosmopolitan international, like, food, I would say in the past 10 years, 15 years, it's really gotten a lot better in the sense that you have so many more different cuisines and ethnicities here that as a result, you can get phenomenal Indian food and Korean food here, that which, I remember 40 years ago living here, I used to tell people your two choices were, ponchos, you raise a flag, or you go to Wyatt's Cafeteria, and about it, But
hey, gotta love the Tex-Mex though. I
mean, no, you raise that flag, man. It's some good stuff, But yeah, it was
the base.
It was the base.
You have the Tex-Mex base and everything else.
Amen. So it's definitely changed over the years, and it's I think it's for the better, but it is definitely growing, that's for sure. So. Yeah. Hey, Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. This has been a wealth of information. And, Jennifer, if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about what you've got to offer, where would you point them to?
What was that? Where?
No, sorry. If they want to get in touch with you or find maybe your content.
conceptelemental.com is my website. And from LinkedIn, you can get there as well. And people can reach me through that or via LinkedIn. And I have a YouTube channel at Concept Elemental that has a lot of this research and, a lot of data if people are interested as well.
Awesome.
So.
Great. Jennifer, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
Bye. So everybody, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Like we talked about, from a risk perspective, there are a lot of things that can go, bump in the middle of the night, or if you have as we all learned during COVID, supply chains can easily be disrupted by what goes on the other side of the planet. And with that supply chain, as we've all learned, energy is no different. And the energy sort of mix has changed dramatically over the years. We talked about the advent of shale inventions, and also respects to the adoption of green energy. Things have definitely changed, but still, with growth, you need energy. And so what's the question? How are you going to get it? How are you going to keep it? And what's that perfect balance? And like anything else, it costs money, and somebody's got to pay for it, whether it be the government or the taxpayer or investors, public entity, private entity. Someone's got to foot the bill for some of this. So hope you enjoyed this. If there are, like all things, guys, if there's a certain topic or individual you want to see, please send me a note on LinkedIn. I'm happy to make it happen. Until next time, guys.